This lecture is the third part of the life cycle on the last two stages of life, which is the adulthood and the elderly stages of life. Just like the other lectures, we're going to go through physical changes, cognitive changes, and social changes within these last two stages. Start with physical changes. The biggest thing that we see when people begin to age is the loss of muscular strength and stamina. What I mean by that is that it's not that older people can't be strong. They certainly can. But it takes their body a longer time to recover from injury and infection. And also, it's much more difficult to build up high amounts of stamina to do really kind of heavy athletic activity. Just as an example, a couple years ago, I hurt my knee in soccer conditioning. And it took me about a month to recover from it. Whereas before, it might have only taken me like a week or a week and a half. Though the influence of exercise on aging can't be understated. Exercise is incredibly important. Not only does exercise influence a person's mental health, it can lower blood pressure and just make a person just more active and higher amounts of stamina. But along with that, exercise also slows the decaying of the telomeres, the caps of the chromosome. That is one of the main influences of sickness and poor health on aging, is when the cells die, when the telomeres have decayed completely. Well, exercise slows down the decaying of that telomere, which allows a person to obviously age a little bit slower. Women go through an additional physical change during the adulthood stage. About the age of 50 or so, they go through what's called menopause. This is the shutting down of the reproductive system, characterized by mood swings, changes in body temperature, so hot flashes and things like that. And the reason for it is a hormonal imbalance. Similar to puberty, where the reproductive system starts, menopause slows it down and eventually stops it. And so the changes in the hormones, the hormone imbalance causes women to really go through that behavioral change along with it. As people begin to get older, their senses begin to diminish along with their reflexes. Reflexes obviously being where a person can respond quickly and react quickly. This is why for older people, it's harder when they drive. But additionally, their senses begin to drop, especially once you hit about the age of 70. You see a pretty significant drop in sense sensitivity. That even starts, though, in the early 30s. Like, for example, I wear glasses now, but didn't start wearing glasses until I was 33, which is when my vision started to decay. In terms of cognitive development, memory is a big thing that's affected by age. Though, as we've learned before, only a little bit. Excuse my cough, I'm sorry. No coronavirus. But what we see is that recall memory goes down significantly. The ability to just pull information out of your brain without any clues definitely goes down. However, recognition memory goes up, and it's most likely through accumulation of experience. And once there's a clue, it allows people to remember those experiences. Intelligence is fairly similar. Fluid intelligence drops considerably. That's like problem solving and critical thinking. The ability to just come up with novel ideas and novel solutions definitely decreases with age. However, crystallized intelligence, the accumulation of knowledge and the application of that knowledge definitely increases, again, for the main reason being accumulated experiences. Some people believe that staying mentally active is just as important as staying physically active. So things like crossword puzzles and Sudoku allows the mind to remain sharp and doesn't go through the same or slows down the process of cognition with elder age. For very older people, they may experience dementia. Dementia is the loss of awareness and the loss of memory. This can happen to any elderly person, though people with underlying diseases that cause dementia are absolutely more at risk. So things like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's causes dementia to maybe happen earlier in life. But for elderly people who don't have those diseases, what we find is that even by the time someone hits 80, dementia may set in, the loss of awareness where a person doesn't know where they are. They don't remember what they're supposed to be doing. They may forget different things like directions on the way home from the grocery store. And what we find is that there's a strong correlation between a significant loss of mental ability and death occurring within 5 years. So when an elderly person shows significant cognitive decline, like for example, when my grandpa was 90, he couldn't find his way back from the grocery store. This shows a significant cognitive decline. He died 3 years later. It's said within 5 years of that moment, death is strongly correlated. As people go through death, adults, especially adults who have elder parents, die. But even obviously younger people who deal with elders like grandparents or older adults dying go through what's called the 5 stages of grief. And this is probably pretty relevant for a lot of people right now. The first being denial and isolation, where they said, I just won't, it didn't occur. I'm just going to not think about it. Next is anger, when they start thinking about it, when they start really kind of processing what's happening. From there, we have depression, which is once the anger goes away, then sadness, extreme sadness and extreme mood changes sit in. Finally, we get to bargaining, and bargaining being I would just give this for one more day with this person, and then ultimately acceptance, where we said, this person has passed, I cared about them, but life still does go on, unfortunately. For social developments, a lot of younger adults have what's called a social clock. Probably a lot of you have it too, which is the idea that you plan out those significant social life events. Like I'm going to be married by 25 and have my first kid by 27 and get my first job at 23 and so on and so forth. But what we find is that social clocks are cultural, meaning that it's not about exactly what age you are. It's about what age the society you live in and the social norms say is acceptable for that time. 100 years ago, it was acceptable for women to be married at 16, 17, 18 years old. Now, not as much. And that's because the social clock has changed with different societal expectations. When adults sometimes hit their 40s and 50s, maybe sometimes even late 30s, they may go through a midlife transition. This is where they attempt to reclaim their youth, maybe buy a sports car, go on a shopping spree, trips with the girls, and so on and so forth. But it's not about age. It's not about when they hit 40, they're going to do this. It's about when adults begin to realize and understand that they, at some point in their life, are going to die. So when adults come to grip with their own mortality. This could be the death of a parent. It could be the development of a life-altering disease like cancer. It could be an operation that's not necessarily related to like wisdom teeth or anything like that. So a serious operation. And this really causes a lot of adults to come to grips with the idea that they are, at some point their life will end. And is very difficult. It's a difficult transition for a lot of adults. Love is probably the biggest social development during adulthood. But the biggest thing that we see is that consummate love, which is more than attraction. As we know from our triangular theory of love, if you might remember that, consummate love is the combination of intimacy, passion, and commitment. And it's more than attraction. It's about wanting to share your life with somebody else and also share your feelings and also be emotionally close along with physically close. Some couples decide to cohabitate before marriage, which basically means that they decide to live together before they get married. This, however, can cause problems. The statistics show that cohabitation, couples who cohabitate actually have higher divorce rates than those that don't. But if you look closely at the numbers are very skewed. So adults who cohabitate in their early 20s may have a very high divorce rate, but those who may wait a lot longer actually do quite well. Couples fight. It's for sure, it's going to happen. Fighting in marriage is actually seen as a healthy thing because this is how compromise is created. Of course, if fighting leads to verbal, physical, or emotional abuse, obviously it's not healthy. But what's said is that fighting in marriage, if it's at a 5-to-1 ratio, meaning that for every one day you fight, there are 5 days that don't. If it's that or better, then it's considered healthy. If it's less than 5-to-1, like if it's 3-to-1, where every one day you fight, you only have 3 days where you don't, then that's beginning to be an unhealthy amount of fighting. Obviously, a big social development is for couples is having children. Children allow couples to really view the beginning of the life cycle in a way that they had experienced when they were children, but they obviously don't remember. This allows a couple to really get a full sense of their ultimate purpose in life, and how children affect their overall purpose and social growth. However, when some children leave, some couples really struggle to fill in the social gap that gets lost with the children leaving their home. And this is referred to as empty nesting. And when this occurs, some adults may find themselves in a social void because their whole social life may have been tied to their child. And so it is recommended for a lot of adults that they have other interests outside of their children. So that way, when the children do leave, because eventually they will, then the adult has still some social life that they want to yearn for and aren't kind of really affected by the empty nesting nearly as much. Having an optimistic outlook after midlife is really important. Optimism can make us more mentally strong. It also has strong influences on our overall physical health. Ultimately, when we successfully age, there are three main things: biopsychosocial approach that really do affect successful aging, biological influences like having no genes predisposing to dementia or other diseases like cancer or heart disease, having appropriate nutrition, have appropriate exercise, psychological influences like being mentally active and having an optimistic outlook, and then sociocultural influences like having meaningful activities and support from family and friends all contribute to a person successfully aging. Finally, some elderly adults do experience one final really sad social development, and that is the loss of a spouse. The loss of a spouse is obviously incredibly difficult, as that person has spent their life with another for sometimes 40, 50, even 60 years. Uh, it's said that if the spouse that is living can make it past the first year of death, they're probably going to do pretty well. But many spouses die within that first year because they basically give up, because the loss of the spouse is such a strong and such a uh, uh, very meaningful event that occurs, not in a good way, obviously. There is some way to help those that have lost their spouse, and that's support networks. So having family and friends, especially children and grandchildren, that can spend time, so that the elderly person is not in social isolation, because when they're in social isolation, generally the thoughts go to the spouse that's lost and can have some significant detrimental effects on that elderly person. Uh, but as we saw with the beginning of the lecture, we started with life, and now this last lecture ends with death, and that's the ultimate life cycle. So hopefully you've seen how humans develop and what kind of changes they go through within the various stages of their life.